Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello, welcome back to Filibuster. I know we've been away now for a few weeks. Personal life sometimes just gets in the way. So we're back again. Hopefully we've got some amazing episodes kind of coming in the next few weeks. And this is an episode I've been wanting to do for ages. Anyone that's read my blog on the Nerd Party or has read my end of year list knows that Mustang, a Turkish movie about young female brides, was one of my favourite movies of last year, and I've been desperate to talk about it with someone. And through a quirk of chance, I was able to find someone that worked in the same building as me that actually gives talks on the movie. So we got together on a rainy day in the conference room in our office, and we sat down and spoke about Mustang. I hope you'll enjoy our discussion and get in touch with us. Let us know what you think. We really appreciate your patience while we've been away, and we can't wait to talk to you again. So I'm joined by Ashley from Shakti Women to talk about the 2015 Turkish-French movie Mustang, the story of a bunch of Turkish girls that are essentially sent to a women's factory within their own home, where they're given experiences and training in becoming young brides. This is a film I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and we've mentioned it on the blog before, and we've mentioned it in some of our top movies of last year. So finally I've got the chance and someone to talk about it with today. How this came about was I have obviously wanted to do this for a while, and I found out someone was doing a talk on this movie at the local film house just a few days ago, and I found out the person works just down the hall from me in the office. So I'm joined by Ashley. So hello, Ashley.
Hello.
So yeah, how did the film house thing kind of come around? That it seems to be this new thing just now where they get people in to talk about European films, and it was so exciting to see Mustang there on the big screen again. So how did you kind of get involved with that?
I am one of the workers at Shakti that goes out and does kind of information sharing events, diversity events, and we have quite a good relationship with Take One Action. Mm-hmm. I think it kind of developed through that, where my colleague Muradol Adwa, she was speaking at the film that was in the Take One Action Film Festival, Sanita, looking at a young girl who wants to be a rapper, and she's from Afghanistan, and what she has to kind of go through to be able to realise her dream, essentially. And so I think they kind of saw Muradol and thought that maybe this organisation, Shakti, would be a good place to kind of ask somebody to come from. So we do that a lot. I was actually speaking at another panel for the same movie earlier in the month that was being shown at Edinburgh University. So out in the land of the internet, we seem to have a bit of a reputation about being able to talk about these
Exactly.
things.
You must be bored of talking about this movie 3 times in a month. So, how did you first see Mustang, and what was your kind of initial impressions of this movie?
I mean, so my kind of background is I am one of the children and young people's workers at Shakti Women's Aid, and we work with black, minority, ethnic women and children who experience domestic abuse, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and other types of honour-based violence. So I have, a lot of experience within the children's team of working with young girls experiencing forced marriage. We, recognise that men experience forced marriage as well, but because of the gender dynamics within our society, women tend to experience more significant consequences, and I think that's illustrated really beautifully throughout the movie. Selma, her proposed groom, Osmad, he doesn't really want to get married to her any more than she does, but when you look at how Selma's life changes, she's not allowed to spend as much time with her sisters anymore, she can't decide where she goes, when she goes, her in-laws control her actions. That's not the same experience for Osman, even though both of them were kind of forced into that relationship. The experience for Selma is more extreme, and that is very reflective to what I see kind of within the people that we support, where you have marriage is often seen as a way to solve a problem. So in the film, it's about solving the girls' problem and their reputation within society and their kind of community. And when that behaviour, because obviously marriage is not a magic one that's going to change anything, and when that behaviour is not controlled or changed, it's very often the woman that's blamed for that. So we have a lot of cases in which, if a man's kind of entered into a homosexual relationship, his family will try to hush that up by getting him married. And then if he continues that relationship after marriage, it's the wife that's kind of blamed for not curing the husband. In terms of kind of, I thought it was a beautifully made movie. I loved the kind of like dreamlike quality, and I thought it was really very powerful and accessible, showing it from the perspective of the youngest sister. But I couldn't help, think about all the real life experiences and how the reality for people experiencing the issue of forced marriages, it's not a very, good outcome for them. Most of them, when professionals are involved, all we can manage to do is delay the relationship, the marriage from happening. And very often when that marriage happens, because within that exchange, the girl is essentially seen as property to be transferred from the care of her family to the care of her groom. There's a lot of abuse that goes around that because she's not seen as having her own autonomy, her own rights. So even though that there is an element to the ending in which, when she goes and she meets with her teacher, you kind of think, oh, there's some happiness in that. I can't help but think of all the girls that I've supported, and they're really not in very good places at all. There's a lot of issues where they're incredibly vulnerable. So when they go into accommodation here, in Edinburgh, you're in hostels where a lot of people have drug and alcohol issues, and they become very vulnerable and susceptible to kind of even more abusive relationships. The other thing as well is, in this movie, I know that the two girls that managed to escape, they're never going to be able to go back. It's never going to be safe for them. And I have, women that I work with are in witness protection program, and they say that they will never be safe. Even if when they're 90 years old, if their family finds them, their family will kill them because, they have gone against the honour code system of their culture, and it won't just be the family that's looking for them, it's the wider community, because it reflects bad on that whole community. And so it's a really difficult topic to deal with. And I think one of the things that is illustrated really beautifully in the movie is that the younger girl, Lali, I think, is it?
Lale, or I'm terrible with the pronunciations of it.
She has this naivety and innocence in which she thinks that she can walk to Istanbul in her slippers and everything will be okay, but the older sisters, when she approaches them about leaving, they know the reality. They know that you need to have money, you need to have a place to live. If you're a single married female, even in the city, you are incredibly vulnerable, and people take advantage of that. They think that you are you must have done something wrong, that you're a prostitute, that you're a whore, that you couldn't possibly come from a respectable family, because if you were, then you wouldn't have run away. So for me, it was kind of a very sad movie. There was a very kind of hauntingly beautiful element to it, but ultimately I thought it was a very gentle introduction into what is really quite a horrific topic and experience for people.
I think there was so many interesting points there, and I think one thing that I kind of took from it, like a lot of people compared it to virgin suicides, for example. But virgin suicides is the male perspective on what it's like for these isolated women, and that you really do get the female point of view, and that, as you were saying, men do have these issues, but it's not really about that, it's about this young family. And I thought was quite fascinating was like the kind of the older women culture within the countryside village, where they are very much kind of supporting this kind of wife factory thing, but at the same time they are covering up for these young kids. Like they destroy the TV power and all that when they're there on the sports screen and everything. Do you think that's one of those ones where it's part of that kind of almost repression in a way, that these people are kind of indoctrinated into having to follow through with that as well?
I mean, we would definitely talk about that as being almost like the ultimate form of patriarchy, in which women have no power. And you can see that the grandmother, she is arguing with the girl's uncle about calming down and not overreacting, so she's trying to protect them in the only way that she knows she can, and that is that to get them married off, because she knows that if that doesn't happen, if they're seen as being kind of loose women, as not being virgins when they get married, they won't be accepted by the community, they'll be excluded, and that will leave them very vulnerable. So we are very keen to talk about patriarchy as being a system in which both men and women are oppressed. Yes, kind of patriarchy suggests, and it's true that kind of particularly white men are, at the top of that the hierarchical pyramid, but everybody is trapped by this system, and you can see that nobody's particularly happy. There aren't really any characters in that movie that you would kind of identify as being particularly happy and satisfied with their lot in life. It's almost kind of like they all just accept it.
You get that awkward like wedding night, for example, where because she doesn't bleed onto the bed sheets, it's like, what is wrong with you? Are you it's automatically assumed you're not a virgin, you're a whore. And then like the humiliation of her having to go to this hospital, the family are called, and they all just go as if it's like a trip, and this is like the middle of the night in Turkey to go get tested, and there's the doctor looking in her private parts just to go, well, these sorts of things. It's the most excruciating scene. You're like, it just pains you that would be something that could happen.
But you see as well that like just she's so hopeless in that situation. She's like, it doesn't really matter what I say, because it's not. And that's the thing about honour within the cultural societies that we're kind of talking about, is that it's about the perceived behaviours, not the actual behaviour. So it really doesn't matter, who she slept with, if she's a virgin, if she's not a virgin. It's how she's perceived in the community, and you can see that in lots of little ways, like when at the beginning, when the girls are kind of, they're out playing on the beach and they come home, and their grandma's kind of calls them one by one into that room, and then they go to the neighbour who reported them. You see that the grandmother, her head's uncovered, and then as soon as she sees that woman, she kind of puts on, and it's about maintaining that image within the community is more important than anything else. And I think that's what's kind of so sad, because you can't create meaningful relationships in that kind of community. You're not going to have happy, healthy individuals within a community, and I think you see lots of examples of that within our culture now. You look at the leading cause of death for men under the age of 45 is suicide, and I think that's because of the isolation that's created around very toxic ideas of masculinity, and about not showing your emotions, about not being weak, always having to be strong, not being able to cry, ask for help, and you can see how that then is played out within the movie and other cultures. And that's why we're so keen to talk about this, is not being yes, culture plays into that, but it's a gendered issue in terms of culture, rather than a specific Turkish culture or Asian culture or African culture, because these experiences are within all cultures. So to give an example of that, the first forced marriage protection order that was taken out in the UK was on behalf of a white Scottish woman, and she was kind of being forced to marry one of her cousins, which he's also white Scottish. So it has got nothing really to do with ethnicity in terms of culture, or culture in terms of ethnicity. It's to do with culture in terms of gender and stories around gender, and what our expectations are of people based on a very kind of binary system.
Because you see it just in the news this week, where they were talking about how inclusion of LGBT marriage in America has resulted in suicides dropping drastically, especially within that community. And it kind of goes to show that if you have that education, understanding, and you don't isolate people, that's wrong, this is wrong, people can go on and have happy, prosperous lives with the people that they love. And that's so frustrating that we're looking at these stories in 2016 going, less gay people are killing themselves because they're allowed to marry who they are. It's fascinating. And I think I went into this movie and I was thinking, it could be kind of like quite anti-religious in a way about that sort of stuff, that this is how marriage is portrayed in this culture and it's wrong, blah blah. But it's more just that within this one family, it never seems to throw stones at any religion or any kind of culture. It seems to be quite a universal and family story, I feel.
And I think forced marriage and the issues discussed in this movie are not really about religion, because I see these kind of behaviours in all religions, Christianity, within the Muslim faith, within Hindu culture, within atheist culture. It's to do with gender, very much so. And I think that I know some people are very uncomfortable with some of these ideas about, talking about gender in this way, but you don't really get the richness of what's happening, the nuance between the relationships, if you don't kind of look at it from that perspective.
For like with the kind of the female characters, to see some like, it's I can't remember the name of the test, but the test where they base like women representation in movies, where that if a woman serves a purpose, if a woman has a certain amount of screen time, if a female character isn't just solely there for the romance of another one. I can't remember. I think it's a Swedish test or something.
Is the Bechdel test or something? That was really interesting.
Because you don't really get films where it's about just like the female characters just hanging out and all that. There's so many of these movies, and even some of the better ones, it's all about their romances and love life. But to get one that kind of shows a European perspective on something is very different, and that you've got these characters together that, as you were saying, it's like a slice of life. It's not just like this big drama piece. It's just, this is what these people are like. You see the characters, where I think it was quite interesting how they viewed the sexuality of the characters, that in most Western movies we see characters in their underwear and everything, it's clearly sexualized. Whereas this, in the movie, they're just sitting around in the sun in their underwear, their pants, they're playing around. The young girls, you see their underwear essentially, and it's not a thing where it's like, this isn't sexualized, and they're almost throwing it to the viewer going, if you think this is sexualized, why do you think that is? It's just girls being in their own environment. I think it makes it quite a fascinating film in that respect.
No, I definitely agree. I think there's something really beautiful about that. The beginning scenes where they're just children, they're just being themselves. There's no kind of they're not pretending to be anything else. They're not, trying to emulate anything. They're just simply being, and there's something really beautiful about that. And I think, unfortunately in our culture, we don't give children opportunities to be very much, from a very young age. They're bombarded by a lot of images and messages about how they should and shouldn't behave. And all of that is kind of based around gender. And I think, one of the things that was really striking was at the showing at the film festival, there was a lady from Turkey who was there, and she was saying that that not all families in Turkey are like this, and she said that when she got married, it was an arranged marriage, but she there's a very strong distinction between arranged and forced, which I won't go into, but she was very clear that it was an arranged marriage for her, very different from what the girls experienced. And on their wedding night, again, all the family kind of were waiting outside to check the sheets and everything, and her husband had kind of said, no, that this is, my private life, and this is a barbaric, tradition, and we're not going to do this anymore. And she was saying that after her wedding night, nobody else in her family or his family ever did that ever again. And I think for me that just illustrates, the power behind standing up and challenging some of these cultural beliefs and traditions. And I think sometimes we feel that culture is this static thing, but it's fluid, it changes. And when there are issues or things that need to be challenged, and people brave enough to do that, that there can be really positive change in those situations. And I think for everybody who's seen the movie or has any understanding of this issue, they're in a very privileged position to be able to take that step back. You see the women in the village, they don't have that privilege because they're embedded in that culture, and they have no freedom in order to take a step back and evaluate what they're experiencing. So if we have that privilege, then with that privilege comes a responsibility to speak out and to be, it sounds a bit corny, but like agents of change and do something about this issue, not just kind of watch the movie and think, oh, that's really sad. Go out and do something about it.
So when you've said that you've kind of done this at like the university, that you've done it at like the film house and various other things, like what's been kind of the reaction to like the film from the viewers and people that you kind of interact with, maybe people that you work with, and what's been kind of their feedback afterwards? Like, oh, what can people do that say this, watch the movie and think, I really don't approve of that? And organisations like yourself, what can people do?
Well, on the whole, I think the response to the movie has been really good. People are very moved by it, very empathetic towards the girls' experiences. So I think that the response has been really good, and I think it's been a really good opportunity to have discussions around gender. because I think the film really illustrates that kind of difference and how, you know, it impacts the whole culture. It's not just this is just an issue for women, it's an issue for everybody. And I think one of the messages that we're trying really strongly to communicate to people is that there are things that you can do within your family situation, within your, you know, work situation, your community situation, and it's really kind of understanding, one, the root cause of these kind of behaviours, that they result, you know, these behaviours are on a spectrum that result from very narrow ideas about women and about women's bodies and men's entitlement to the women's bodies. And I think you can start to change some of these attitudes and change some of these stories by, you know, challenging comments or ideas that you hear people say. And a lot of times people are like, yeah, but, you know, can you not just have a laugh? And it's like, well, I can have a laugh, but, you know, I see the reality of these thoughts and these comments when they kind of follow through to their natural conclusion, and that means that it's not funny for me anymore. You know, when I see kind of you know, adverts or billboards where you have kind of like half naked women on them, you know, in the grand scheme of things, is that a really big issue? Well, no, but it is when you look at our cultural context and what those images then suggest to people. And not everybody is going to be abusive because they see those images, but a significant proportion of our culture go on to be quite abusive, especially towards women. And a significant proportion of our, you know, the men in our culture go on to be perpetrators. And so you kind of have to start taking account, you know, responsibility for these messages that we kind of put out there. So I would say that, you know, if you're really moved by that movie, then, you know, taking these comments seriously and, you know, challenging people on their views, even in a small way. You know, like I'm always doing it at home. I have, you know, 2 younger brothers. And they're forever kind of rolling their eyes whenever I, you know, say stuff. They're like, oh, for goodness sake, can you not just leave the feminist stuff at home, you know, or at work for once? But I think when you see the reality day in, day out of the consequence of these, it becomes so much harder. And, you know, the more help and the more people are willing to kind of, you know, be brave and stand and have the courage to challenge it, the better it will be ultimately.
Absolutely. And say someone was listening to this, for example, they stumbled across it after listening to the movie and they were fascinated by what your organisation can do. What can your organisation do to help, like, children and young people, and how can people kind of find you and get in contact with you?
So the best way to find us is if you just Google Shakti Edinburgh. It will come up. We have like Facebook and Twitter accounts as well if you want to get in touch with us on social media. And ultimately, what we do is we try our best to empower women and children that are in these situations, because ultimately, you know, one of the consequences of this kind of behaviour is they're very disempowered, that they have no choices about how they want to live their life. So, for example, in the movie, you see that none of the girls are allowed shoes; they're only allowed slippers. And I think that's a very common experience, having control, access to things like going to the bathroom or deodorant or all these kind of things. So really what we try to do is give people the space to make decisions about what they want to do with their life and how they want to live their life. So we're not in the business of telling people what they should and shouldn't do. You know, we're not there to tell people that they need to leave that relationship or leave that situation. It's really about helping them have all the information that they need in order to make decisions. And another big part of what we do is there's an issue that we're campaigning around just now called no recourse to public funds. So basically what this means is that spouses or migrants who come to this country, they have limited access to public funds. And so when people experience domestic abuse and they're trying to claim a space of refuge, they can't access that refuge because they don't have any access to housing benefit. So we are trying to campaign and lobby the Scottish Government to say that anybody who's experiencing abuse should have the right to access support and a place of safety. And I think that's also one of the issues around kind of forced marriage, is that, you know, if these girls had been migrants to the UK, you know, fleeing those situations, they wouldn't have been able to get any help. They wouldn't even been able to come to Shakti because our funders have told us that we cannot work with people who are no recourse public funds. So I think that's a really big issue. Speak to your MPs, your councillors. Say to them that you want this to change, that you want organisations to be able to help these people, because I think it's a basic human right. So we ultimately, if I was to sum that up, would be that we are there to kind of walk alongside people and help them have the kind of life that they want to.
Yeah.
A life ultimately free from abuse and a life of safety.
I think we can all agree to that. Is there any kind of final thoughts you've got, or any films that if someone liked Mustang, that I always am conscious of that sometimes when we recommend films like Mustang, that the audience that are seeing it aren't so much the kind of general population, that not many people go, oh, what film are we going to watch tonight? Oh, let's watch that Turkish movie about the young girls getting married. Would you have any kind of films that you'd recommend, or kind of further readings, or any final thoughts?
I definitely, there's a really good movie at the moment on Netflix, if you're kind of interested a little bit more in the gender aspects of the movie, called The Mask You Live In, and it's really good. It's quite long, but it's definitely worth watching. There's also a movie, especially kind of perhaps if you're interested in the impact of technology and abuse and things like that. I think it's called Hello Daisy or something like that.
That sounds interesting, yeah.
Again, these are kind of all on Netflix. And if you're looking to do any kind of reading, it's not, I would say, light or easy reading, but there's a really good book by Evan Stark called Coercive Control that's definitely worth reading. And if I was to offer a kind of final thought, a question that I got asked a lot at the panels was, what did I think the purpose of this movie was, and did I think it achieved that purpose? And a lot of people were asking, because who are the people that are going to watch this movie? It's going to, predominantly kind of middle class European people. This is not going to be shown in, the rural villages of Turkey. It's not really, yes, it's about raising awareness of an issue, but it's not really going to change a lot of things, because the people that you are trying to target to change these behaviours are not people that are going to be rocking up to, the film house to watch it. So my kind of feeling was that wasn't really the purpose behind the movie. I have worked with lots of survivors of all kinds of violence, and ultimately what they want is to be heard and to be recognised as having value and worth. And I think one of the things that I think the movie does achieve is really telling the story of the girls, and allowing the audience to be witness to their experiences, and for the audience to be able to say, yes, we hear you, we see what you've been through, and we don't think it's right. And I think that for me is really what the movie's about. It's about standing as a witness to somebody's experience, and giving that person an opportunity to have a voice and voice what's happened to them. And I would say that I think that's achieved really well within the movie. It
feels like even though there's gates around this house, that we've got such an insight into what it must be like behind those gates, that you could pass through these places and never know what was going on behind closed doors. And it really was insightful for me, because it wasn't something I knew too much about. I was familiar with it, but not too much. And it really was, it was one of the best films of last year. It's just, hopefully people will seek out your organisation if they can relate or have any follow-on questions and stuff. So thank you so much for joining me today, Ashley, and I'm sure you've got another 6 Mustang panels to do today, so I'll let you get on. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks again to Ashley for joining me on that episode. She took time out of her busy schedule, and I really appreciate it. It was great to hear her insights on this amazing movie. There was certainly gave me a lot to think about, and I'm certainly keen to dive back into it. So check us out on thenerdparty.com. Leave us a review, review, subscribe, and share with a friend. It always means so much. And check out all our other amazing shows, from Nerd Nuptial all the way to Great Shot Kid and everything in between. So check us out. Check us out and join Nerd Party on Twitter, at the Nerd Party on Instagram, and check us out on facebook.com/thenerdparty on Facebook. So until next time, I love you. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.